pipe cleaners. The staging area buzzed with the low hum of power armor servos and the occasional crackle of static over comms. The underground maintenance facility near the spine's magnetic catapult was a stark contrast to the gleaming towers of the city above. A realm of rust, frost-covered pipes, and shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. Here, beneath the colossal structure responsible for keeping the orbital stations alive, the air was thick with the weight of necessity. The catapult had to be repaired, no matter the cost. Donovan stood at the center of his squad, his helmet tucked under one arm. The harsh overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting jagged shadows across his power armor. Scuffed and worn from countless battles, the matte black plates bore the marks of a soldier who had seen it all. His voice was steady, calm, but carried an edge that demanded attention. "Listen up," Donovan began, his sharp eyes scanning the three soldiers standing before him. "This isn't just another sweep and clear. That catapult is the lifeline for space. Without it, every station and colony relying on those supplies is as good as dead." The squad members nodded, their expressions a mixture of grim determination and readiness. Collins, the demolitions expert, leaned casually against a crate, his gear bristling with explosives. His smirk was faint, but his eyes betrayed his focus. "Explosions don't fix coolant leaks, boss," he quipped, his tone light but his grip on a satchel charge firm. "They do when the leaks bite back," Donovan shot back without missing a beat. "Stay sharp." Next to Collins, Vargas adjusted her helmet optics. The sniper was quiet as always, her demeanor as precise as the enhanced lenses on her armor. "What's the word on the drone?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "Gone," Donovan replied bluntly. "We lost contact 5 minutes after deployment. Last footage showed severed pipes and—" He paused, his jaw tightening. A sound, rhythmic, like a whistle. The room fell silent, the faint hum of the facility's aging power grid filled the void. Keller, the heavy weapons specialist, shifted uneasily. His reinforced armor made him a towering figure, and the massive cannon slung over his shoulder only added to the impression. "Whistlers," he muttered, his voice low. "Gotta be." Donovan didn't confirm or deny. Instead, he turned toward the holographic map flickering above a battered console. The layout of the tunnels spread out before them like the veins of some colossal beast, twisting, intersecting, and spiraling into the depths. "The coolant system's main hub is here," Donovan said, pointing to a central chamber marked in red. "Engineers need it secured before they can even think about starting repairs. The power drain is coming from this sector." He indicated an adjacent area marked in yellow. "If there's a nest, it's likely here. That's where we'll start." Collins whistled softly. "Lot of ground to cover for 4 people." "We've done more with less," Donovan replied. "And I'm not expecting a welcoming committee. Budget cuts mean this place hasn't seen maintenance crews in years. It's flooded in parts, drained in others. Expect frost, rust, and unstable ground." Vargas leaned in, her sharp gaze fixed on the map. "What about the engineers who were here before?" Donovan's face darkened. "Only one made it back. Couldn't make repairs. He actually flooded part of the area, but that's mostly drained now, which is why we're going in first." The tension in the room thickened. Collins shifted, cracking his knuckles. "So, we clear out the boogeymen and get home in time for dinner. Simple enough?" "It's never simple," Keller grunted. "Not down here." As if on cue, the lights flickered again, casting the room in brief darkness. When they stabilized, Donovan stepped back from the console and slipped on his helmet. The HUD lit up with tactical overlays and mission objectives. "Collins, you're on demolition. Clear any blockages and secure our fallback routes. Vargas, your eyes on from a distance. Keller, your point for close quarters. Everyone stays together, no lone wolves." "And if we hear whistling?" Collins asked, his smirk fading. "Then we move fast," Donovan replied, his voice steel. "And we shoot faster." The squad fell into formation as Donovan led the way toward the tunnel entrance. The metal doors groaned as they slid open, revealing the yawning blackness beyond. A chill gust of air carried the faint smell of coolant and decay, setting nerves on edge. "All right," Donovan said, his tone firm. "Let's clean this place up." The squad advanced into the darkness, the rhythmic clank of their armor echoing through the tunnel. Somewhere in the depths, a faint sound drifted back toward them. A whistle, faint but deliberate. Donovan's jaw clenched, his rifle rising as he led his team deeper into the spine's cold, unwelcoming underbelly. The hunt had begun. The tunnel stretched ahead like the gullet of some massive industrial beast. The squad's footsteps echoed in measured beats, punctuated by the occasional hiss of steam escaping from fractured pipes. Donovan led the way, his rifle at the ready, its barrel casting faint reflections from the bioluminescent puddles scattered across the floor. The glow wasn't natural, nothing here was. It came from coolant spills, glimmering faintly, as if warning the intruders of dangers ahead. "Eyes sharp," Donovan muttered into the calm. His voice carried the weight of experience, a reminder to his team that vigilance wasn't optional down here. Collins broke the silence, his tone light but strained. "You ever feel like these places are alive, all the hissing and creaking, like it's breathing?" "Cut the chatter," Vargas said, her voice clipped as her enhanced optics swept the passage ahead. "Something's not right." The tunnel groaned ominously, as if agreeing with her. Above, corroded pipes leaked thin streams of coolant that sizzled as they hit the floor. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the metallic tang of rust and the faint, acrid bite of burned circuitry. The squad came to a halt at a junction where rusted safety rails lined a grated platform. Vargas held up a hand, signaling a stop, her sniper rifle scanning the area. Although it was almost claustrophobic, the tunnels went a long way. "What is it?" Donovan asked. She pointed to a severed safety line dangling from about 50 yards away. It swayed slightly in the faint draft, its end cut clean. "This must be where the first team came down," Vargas said grimly. "Didn't end well." "Looks like we still have a long way down to go," Keller added, his voice a low rumble. He gestured to scrape marks leading from the grating into a side corridor. Donovan's jaw tightened. He motioned for the squad to move forward. As they advanced, Collins paused to examine a section of wall. Deep gouges marred the surface, cutting through layers of grime to reveal raw, gleaming metal beneath. "Claw marks," he said, running a gloved finger along the grooves. "Big ones." "Whistlers," Keller muttered, gripping his heavy rifle tighter. "They've been here a while." The air grew colder as the squad pressed on, the faint sound of dripping water joining the orchestra of groaning metal. The light ahead flickered erratically, revealing a shadow that moved in unnatural jerks. "There," Vargas whispered, her voice taut. She raised her rifle and the squad froze. A whistler crouched by a leaking coolant pipe, its glossy black exoskeleton shimmering faintly in the dim light. It was larger than the ones Donovan had seen before, but something was off. Its movements were sluggish, its limbs trembling as if the creature were struggling against its own weight. Donovan raised a fist to signal a halt, but the whistler's head snapped up, its triangular face tilting toward them. The faint whistling began, melodic and unsettling, reverberating through the tunnel like a dirge. "Take it down," Donovan ordered, his voice low and firm. Keller stepped forward, his rifle unleashing a burst of heavy fire. The rounds struck the whistler, cracking its exoskeleton and sending a spray of glowing fluid across the walls. But the creature burst into action. It darted sideways, its talons scraping against the floor as it lunged for Keller. "Move!" Donovan barked. Keller swung the butt of his rifle, catching the creature in its side. It staggered, its whistling turning sharp and discordant, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Donovan's neck stand on end. Vargas fired next, a precision shot that pierced the creature's leg, finally sending it collapsing into a heap of twitching limbs. Keller finished it off with another long burst. The squad stood over the corpse, their breath visible in the frigid air. Glowing fluid pooled beneath the whistler, casting an eerie light that danced across their armor. That was slower than usual, Keller said, his voice gruff. They're usually on you before you can blink. It's the coolant, Donovan said, crouching to examine the creature. They're feeding on it, but it's affecting them. Maybe it's not enough, or maybe it's too much. That whistle, though, Collins added, glancing nervously down the tunnel. It wasn't just noise. Donovan straightened, his eyes narrowing. The faint whistle that had accompanied the whistler hadn't faded. It had grown distant, echoing through the tunnels like a ripple in a dark lake. They know we're here, he said, his voice grim. And they're calling for backup. Without waiting for questions, he motioned for the squad to move. Double time. We've stirred the nest. Let's not be here when it wakes up. As the squad moved deeper into the maze, the oppressive silence of the tunnels was replaced by the faint, rhythmic melody of distant whistling. It was everywhere and nowhere, all at once, a ghostly warning that this mission had only just begun. The squad moved cautiously through the labyrinth of tunnels, their footsteps muffled by the damp grime coating the floor. When they entered the coolant chamber, the sheer size of it brought them to a collective halt. The room was cavernous, an industrial cathedral dominated by colossal coolant pipes and hulking machinery. The faint bioluminescent glow of spilled coolant cast everything in an unnatural green boule hue, dancing across the jagged walls and shadowy recesses. The air hummed faintly with static electricity, making the hair on Donovan's arms stand on end even beneath the insulation of his power armor. "Whoa," Collins muttered, taking in the alien beauty of the scene. "Looks like something out of a bad dream." Donovan ignored him, his eyes locked on the center of the chamber. There, nestled between the coolant systems and humming machinery, was a sprawling, nest-like structure. It was a grotesque amalgamation of scavenged metal, torn cables, and organic material that glistened in the dim light. Bioluminescent liquid trickled down its sides, pooling around the base in a fluorescent lake. Around the nest, several whistlers moved sluggishly, their glossy exoskeletons reflecting the eerie glow. Their triangular heads tilted erratically, and their scalpel-edged limbs twitched, as if struggling to maintain control. "Contact," Vargas whispered through the comms, her rifle already trained on one of the creatures. "Looks like they've set up shop." Donovan scanned the scene, his HUD tagging each whistler as a hostile. "They're feeding," he muttered. "That coolant, it's messing with them." "Messing with them or powering them," Keller grunted, his heavy weapon ready. "Doesn't matter. They're not staying." Donovan's sharp eyes assessed the room, noting the whistlers' erratic movements. Though slower than usual, they still exuded an unsettling sense of menace. Their heads snapped to attention at the faintest sound, and the rhythmic whistling filled the chamber like a haunting melody. It was as if the very walls were singing a dirge for the squad. "Spread out," Donovan ordered. "Take cover, stay quiet. Collins, get those shock charges in place. We funnel them, box them in." Collins nodded, moving with practiced efficiency along the edge of the chamber. He planted the charges at key access points, each one emitting a faint electronic beep as it armed. Vargas crouched behind a coolant pipe, her enhanced optics scanning the nest, while Keller took up position near a massive conduit, his heavy weapon humming faintly as it primed. The whistlers hadn't noticed them yet, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every creak of metal, every hiss of coolant made the squad flinch. Donovan's grip on his rifle tightened. They were in the belly of the beast now, and it was only a matter of time before it woke. "Charges set," Collins whispered. "Ready when you are, boss." Donovan took a deep breath. "On my mark. Vargas, pick off the far one. Keller, light 'em up when they move. Collins, trigger the charges after the first volley." The squad acknowledged in unison, their voices tight with adrenaline. Donovan's finger hovered over his trigger. "Mark!" The room erupted in chaos. Vargas's rifle barked first, the shot piercing the skull of a whistler near the coolant pool. The creature collapsed with a wet thud, its glowing blood spraying across the floor. The others reacted instantly, their heads snapping toward the squad's position. The melodic whistling transformed into a sharp, discordant wail, that reverberated through the chamber. Keller opened fire, his heavy rifle roaring as a hail of bullets tore into the nest. Metal shards and organic debris exploded outward, and 2 whistlers were shredded in the initial barrage. Collins triggered the charges, and a series of sharp explosions funneled the remaining whistlers toward the squad's kill zone. But the creatures didn't panic. Even in their lethargic state, their movements were calculated and predatory. One darted sideways, using the nest as cover, while another scaled the coolant pipes with eerie grace, its claws cutting into the metal as it climbed. "They're spreading too wide," Vargas called out, firing at the climber. Her shots connected, but the creature pressed on, its glowing blood dripping onto the machinery below. A whistler lunged at Keller, but he swung his weapon like a club, catching the creature mid-leap and sending it crashing into a wall. Before he could finish it off, another emerged from the shadows, forcing him to retreat under a hail of sparks and coolant spray. Donovan's rifle barked as he advanced, his shots ripping through another whistler's torso. The creature crumpled, its whistling dying with a wet gurgle. But the squad was losing their initial advantage. The creatures were no longer sluggish. The coolant that had dulled them seemed to wear off as the heat of battle intensified. "Keep them off balance," Donovan barked. "Collins, cover Keller. Vargas, take out that climber." Collins moved quickly, his grenades sending shock waves through the chamber. The explosions disoriented the whistlers, but it was only temporary. One creature leapt through the smoke, its claws grazing Collins's armor. He stumbled but recovered, firing his sidearm into its head at point-blank range before switching to his rifle to finish it off. Vargas finally landed a clean shot on the climber, the impact sending it plummeting into the bioluminescent pool below. It writhed briefly before going still, its glowing blood spreading like an oil slick. By the time the last whistler fell, the chamber was a war zone. The nest was in ruins, and the floor was slick with glowing blood and coolant. Keller leaned against a shattered pipe, his armor dented and scorched. Vargas's rifle smoked faintly as she scanned the room, her breathing ragged. Collins wiped his visor, muttering, "Remind me to ask for a raise." Donovan stood in the center of the carnage, his rifle still aimed at the nest. The melodic whistling had faded, replaced by the hum of damaged machinery and the hiss of leaking coolant. He lowered his weapon slowly, his eyes sweeping the chamber one last time. "Clear," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let's secure the rest of this area. This place needs more repairs, and a mop." As the squad regrouped, the faint echo of the whistler's melody seemed to linger, a reminder that the battle was won, but the war was far from over. The tunnels echoed with chaos. Gunfire, screams, and the eerie melodic whistling of the whistlers reverberated through the labyrinthine passages. The squad had regrouped near a cluster of coolant conduits, their weapons at the ready. The confined space worked against them. The whistlers, with their unnatural grace, darted through vents, pipes, and shadowy alcoves. Keller braced himself against a coolant pipe, his heavy rifle trained on a vent. The sound of claws scraping metal reached his ears a split second before a whistler burst through a grate. Its jagged limbs slashed at him, cutting through his shoulder plate. He roared in pain, falling back as the creature prepared to lunge again. "Got it!" Vargas shouted. Her rifle went off, and the whistler's head snapped back, its glowing blood spraying across the walls as it collapsed. Donovan moved swiftly, his HUD flashing warnings of multiple hostiles. "Stay tight! Watch the vents!" he shouted, his voice sharp but steady. Another whistler lunged from a side passage, aiming for Collins. Donovan intercepted it mid-air, his reinforced gauntlets slamming into its carapace, sending it crashing into a wall. But there was no time to celebrate. The whistlers moved as one, their haunting sounds harmonizing into a chorus of coordinated destruction. "Collins, we need a choke point." "Funnel them," Donovan shouted over the cacophony. "On it." Collins sprinted to a nearby junction, planting explosive charges along the narrow passage. "Fall back. Let's see how they like this." The squad retreated just as the first whistler swarmed the junction. Collins triggered the detonator and the explosion rocked the tunnels, shrapnel tearing through the creatures. Keller, bleeding but determined, took point with his heavy weapon. "Come on, you freaks," he bellowed, unleashing a barrage of fire. The rounds tore through two whistlers, their bioluminescent blood splattering across the ceiling like an unholy rain. Vargas picked off another from a distance, her enhanced optics allowing her to see through the swirling mist of coolant and smoke. "3 more on your left, Donovan," she called out. Donovan turned just in time to face the oncoming trio. His rifle barked, dropping one, but the remaining 2 closed the distance. He shifted to his power armor's blade, a reinforced steel edge designed for close-quarters combat. The first whistler lunged, its jagged limb narrowly missing his visor as he parried with the blade, slicing through its limb with a satisfying crack. The second creature circled him, its whistle rising in pitch. Donovan lunged forward, driving the blade into its center, pinning it against a coolant pipe. The creature writhed, its glowing blood hissing as it mixed with the icy coolant spray. The air was thick with the stench of burnt metal and the tang of bioluminescent fluid. The squad fought tooth and nail, their movements precise but desperate. Collins ducked under a slashing limb, firing his sidearm into the creature's exposed underbelly. Keller, despite his injuries, used his bulk to shield Vargas as she reloaded, his heavy rifle a constant roar in the confined space. Donovan engaged one of the larger whistlers, its movements more aggressive than the others. It charged him, its jagged limbs slashing in a deadly rhythm. He sidestepped, using the narrow passage to limit its range of motion. With a powerful swing, he severed one of its limbs, the blade sparking against its exoskeleton. The creature shrieked, a sound that resonated deep in his bones, but he didn't hesitate. A final thrust drove his blade through its core, cutting it almost in half, and it collapsed in a heap. When the last whistler fell, the tunnels were eerily silent. The squad stood among the carnage, their breathing heavy, their armor dented and scorched. Bioluminescent blood pooled around their boots, casting an otherworldly glow on the grim scene. "Status check," Donovan ordered, his voice strained but steady. "Keller's hit, but I've got him patched up," Vargas reported, her tone grim. "He'll live." Collins wiped his visor, smearing the glowing blood across it. "Remind me never to sign up for tunnel duty again," he muttered, holstering his weapon. Donovan surveyed the chamber. The nest was in ruins, the coolant systems damaged but salvageable. He noticed something strange about the whistlers. They were weaker than he'd expected. Their movements had been sluggish, their attacks less coordinated than previous encounters. "They were feeding off the coolant and the catapult's energy," Vargas said, following his gaze. "But it seems like it's messing with them." Donovan replied, his tone dark. "Whatever the case, this isn't over." With the nest destroyed, Donovan radioed the engineers, who began repairs on the coolant systems under heavy guard. The catapult's operations would resume within hours, ensuring the survival of those relying on orbital resupply. Donovan stood at the edge of the chamber, watching as his squad regrouped. Keller leaned against a pipe, his injuries bandaged but still fresh. Vargas and Collins worked together to secure the remaining whistler parts, their movements efficient despite their exhaustion. The location was finally secured for repairs. Donovan called for them to begin. As the engineers worked, Donovan's thoughts lingered on the fight. The whistlers' behavior had been different. Less aggressive, more methodical. Was it the coolant affecting them? Or were they evolving in ways he couldn't predict? Keller broke the silence. "Why were they so sluggish? Not that I'm complaining, but it felt off." "Environmental factors?" Vargas suggested. "Maybe the coolant disrupted their systems? Or maybe they were testing us," Donovan said quietly, his eyes fixed on the glowing blood staining the floor. "Whatever it was, we can't let our guard down." The squad packed up their gear, the weight of the mission heavy on their shoulders. As they prepared to leave, Donovan stared at a map of the spine on his HUD. He marked the area as a red zone, a place that would need constant vigilance. "We've got work to do," he muttered, his resolve steeled. The whistlers were a threat that wouldn't disappear, but neither would he.